Thanks so much for the kind introduction. Now, I want to ask you, has there ever been a time when your employees behaved in a way that you would prefer they didn't behave? Have you ever been surprised that they behaved that way? Would you like to start being surprised that they're behaving that way? Would you like to make sure that they behave in a way that aligns with your priorities of serving citizens? Well, that's what this presentation is about. That's the goal of this presentation. Now, when I walked on the stage, many of you might have thought, and started opening my mouth, many of you might have thought, hey, where's this guy from? I obviously have an accent. And that's a question I get asked pretty often. Now, my parents chose to leave the country of my birth, which is a small country called Moldova in Eastern Europe. It's well known as one of the least happy countries in the world. So I'm really glad that they left. Now, I was a little kid. I was 10 when they left. And when we left, it was a really hard time when we immigrated to the States. I grew up dirt poor in New York City, roach-infested apartments. We gathered, my parents, my mom washed people's houses for a living. My dad drove a bread truck, so at least we weren't hungry. But we had to kind of figure out furniture. We foraged it from dumpsters, dumpster diving for foragers. So that was kind of my background. And I was proud of my cultural heritage, regardless of that. I was proud that I came from Eastern Europe, from Moldova. So unlike many immigrants, I decided not to drop my accent. Now, many people chose to do that. I chose not to do that. Unfortunately, as I later learned, that wasn't a very wise decision on my part. Because when I got into the research on this topic, and that's kind of my background in research, social intelligence, we'll talk about what there is. There's a phenomenon called accent discrimination, where people perceive those with foreign accents to be less trustworthy than people who are not. Now, there's only one accent that that's not the case for. Can anyone guess what that is? British, yes. That is the only one because of, our cultural superiors. We still have a cultural superiority of the empire. So that's an important aspect of what we want to talk about, of social intelligence, of understanding what motivates people. And we'll talk a little bit about what social intelligence is. But before that, I want to talk a little bit about hidden biases. Accent discrimination is one of many hidden, implicit biases that we don't really think about. But we are serving a greatly diverse citizenry who are becoming more and more diverse by the day. And accent discrimination is really impeding our ability to serve them well, to serve our constituents, to serve citizens. It's really hurting us, both in how we engage with citizens and the kind of employees that we have, the kind of employees that we retain. Especially the case, as many of you might have heard about, 2 Theo talks ago about millennials. Millennials are increasingly diverse. So this is a major issue. So we need to address these hidden biases. We need to address how they're hurting us. And we need to address them using social intelligence strategies. Now, many of you might have heard about emotional intelligence. Social intelligence is something new and distinct. Emotional intelligence refers to us being aware of ourselves, our own emotions, how we feel, and being able to manage our emotions. Social intelligence is different. Social intelligence refers to us being aware of other people's emotions and being able to manage those emotions. So I'm tying that back into the beginning, the first 3 questions. How do you prevent yourself from being surprised by your employees' behavior? How do you motivate them to behave in a way that's aligned with your goals? Now, you need to understand that the key here is addressing cognitive biases. Now, what are cognitive biases? You might have heard this term. It kind of floats around. Well, turns out that recent research shows that we as human beings are not adapted for the modern world. We're adapted for the savanna environment. That means 2 major things. We respond on fight or flight responses. Fight or flight, that's our major primary motivator. About 90% of our decision-making is driven by emotions, fight or flight, gut intuitions, gut reactions. Another component of that is tribalism, group belonging. And that's what the accents issue is about, tribalism. Which group do we belong to? Which group do we not belong to? So if we hear somebody with an accent that doesn't seem like it belongs to our group, we feel worse about them, we trust that person less. And that's a phenomenon called the horns effect. The horns effect refers to when we dislike one characteristic of someone, we will dislike all of their other characteristics. When we like one characteristic of someone, we like all of their other characteristics. That's a very common one. It's one of the explanations, it's a fundamental explanation for implicit biases. Now, many people, when you talk about diversity trainings, they will talk about how it's highly problematic for people to express racist, to express unpleasant, discriminatory emotions. That's a problematic way of talking about this topic because it's very natural to be tribalist. We all do it. We're all tribal to some extent or other. And if we talk about that in a way that guilts and shames other people, well, we're just going against human intuitions. We're going against gut reactions. And that will not help you in the long run. What will really help you is understanding that these things are natural. We can't control our feelings, we can control our behaviors. And so this is the topic that we need to be talking about. How do we behave, not how we feel? We need to notice how we feel. We need to notice how other people feel. That's social intelligence, and manage their behaviors. So an example is a Midwest Department of Transportation that had about 8,000 staff at the time I consulted for them. And they had a problem with diversity hiring. So the HR manager, she wanted to make sure that the hires were well balanced in terms of diversity, but she was having a problem with that. So she was incentivizing diversity hires. So what we did, we examined the process of hiring. And what we found was that there was a really great diversity incentive for hiring people to address the horns bias. So people who are diverse. There was that incentive. But there was no incentive to prevent halo effect, to prevent hiring people who are like you. So her hiring managers were still hiring people who are like themselves in very many ways. And that was a big problem. So we addressed that problem, and her diversity numbers went up significantly. So the key there was not only to give positive points for diversity, but to give negative points for similarity, for the halo effect. So it's a very simple tweak to the hiring process, the kind of standardized questionnaires that were being asked. For just some points, just some tweaks. And that's the kind of thing that addresses the halo and horns effect. Now this happens at all levels, the halo and horns effect. I was giving a presentation, so for background, I live in Columbus, Ohio. And as you know, that's the Buckeye State. I was a professor at Ohio State. I was contractually obligated to root for the Buckeyes. I-O, there you go. Natural instinct. Now, I was giving a presentation like this to a group of local HR professionals, about 100 of them. And I asked them, hey, would you hire a Michigan fan? Now, Michigan is the big rival of Ohio State, and the people who laughed know what I mean. Now, out of that 100, I asked them to raise their hands. Only 5 raised their hands. So, folks, it doesn't only happen to our employees. It happens to us as well. So that's what we need to think about. Halo and horns effect. How does it influence us? How does it influence our recruiting managers? That's one thing I want to talk about. So that's the halo and horns effect. And those of you who have your handouts, that should be obvious there. Let's talk a little bit about some different thing that's even subtler. Now, how many of you, raise your hands, if you see a young woman? Put your hand down. Raise your hand if you see an old woman. Okay, we have about half. Now, this relates to something that's known as the pessimism and the optimism bias. As you can see, this picture is ambiguous. On the bottom left, a version of that picture looks more like a young woman. On the bottom right, a version of that picture looks more like an older woman. People who are optimistic would tend to see a younger woman, just because in our culture, youth is associated with positivity. People who are pessimistic tend to see the older woman. There you go. You're laughing because you know it's true. This was actually a big problem for my wife and I, so it mentioned that her influence on me. When we co-founded a nonprofit together in 2014 to popularize the research on decision-making, this was a big problem because we had a lot of conflicts, we had a lot of tensions, we had a lot of fights. She tends to, I tend to think that the grass is greener on the other side of the hill, that everything will be wonderful. I'm very optimistic. She tends to think that the grass is yellow on the other side of the hill. Very pessimistic. So we had a lot of conflicts until we figured out a really good way of working together, which I then brought to my clients. And so this was a different example. There was a school district in Rhode Island. This was in 2013. When the school district won a grant from Obama's Race to the Top for $75 million, or not the school district, I'm sorry, the whole of Rhode Island won a grant for $75 million as part of the Race to the Top. And they were trying to figure out, the local school district, how to address the grant, how to get more money, and so on. And they were having a lot of fights between people there, between optimists and pessimists. So the optimists were generating ideas. They were saying, hey, this is what we should do. These are great ideas. Pessimists kept shooting them down, saying, no, that's bad. That's dangerous. Don't do that. And so that was a really bad conflict, a lot of tension. So I was brought in. And what we found was that optimists were perceiving pessimists just as naysayers who wanted to tear them down, whereas pessimists were perceiving optimists as just going off half-cocked and not having good ideas. So that's the perceptions, right? Now, once we figured out how to collaborate well together, the best way of collaborating for pessimists and optimists is to separate the process of decision-making and idea creation. So creation of ideas belongs to optimists, because pessimists are bad at it. They just see all the flaws of their ideas. They're not good at brainstorming. Tends to be the case. So the optimists create the ideas and realize that they're half-baked potatoes and give them all to the pessimists. And then the pessimists finish baking the potatoes and take the few ideas that are really great and make them wonderful. So that school district, that really worked out well for them. They got their numbers up from 2013 and graduation rates to 2015 from 73% to 79%, which was more than twice as much as other Rhode Island school districts at this time, because they learned how to collaborate well together. So that is a collaboration technique that can be deployed. The key is to dealing with cognitive biases. Being aware of them for yourself, integrating the knowledge into your organizations about them, and finally using science-based techniques. So I talked about 2 science-based small techniques, small tweaks that you can use. Lots more strategic techniques available. Those of you who have handouts, I'll talk about what you can do with them. But I have a book available, a limited number of copies outside on the table, and I'll be autographing it after the presentation. So this is just simply sponsored by the company for which I work. So it's not paid. You can take one, but there's a limited number of copies. So I suggest if you want one, you make sure to grab it. Specific strategies. You want to put numbers on your evaluations of reality. Putting numbers creates transparency. You predict what's going to happen. You evaluate what is a specific number, how good something will be. That's a really great strategy to work with optimists and pessimists, because optimists will tend to have high evaluations, pessimists will tend to have low evaluations, and you can predict more realistic evaluations if you work together. You clearly communicate about the numbers to relevant people and get buy-in. So this is really important, to get buy-in from various stakeholders. If you don't get buy-in, then you'll just be creating numbers up there theoretically. That's really important. So this is a really great strategy to address a lot of problems. The numbers really help address cognitive biases. Another one that I want to talk about is getting an external perspective. External perspective from someone here in the room who now knows about cognitive biases. Another external perspective can be from someone who is a coach or consultant, or someone who is a mentor in your organization. That's really helpful for seeing your own flaws, your own problems, your own cognitive biases. I want to talk about now the key takeaways from this presentation. 1, don't trust your gut. Your intuitions will fail you. Really. I am an optimist, actually. I just know about that our intuitions fail us badly. And that's something to really know about. Second, watch out for cognitive biases. There are over 100 of them. You can go to Wikipedia. It's a good resource for this. Again, my book is outside. There are plenty of other resources we can talk about later. And use science-based decision-making strategies. These are the kinds of things that will help you address the kind of problems that go on in our gut that are really influencing highly negative tendencies in a lot of areas, including in public sector HR management. I want to encourage you to invest in socially intelligent leadership, in social intelligence-based strategies. Now, social intelligence, as I mentioned, is the ability to understand other people's emotions, what drives them, including these cognitive biases, and the ability to manage other people's emotions, to get them to advance your organization's goals. That's what social intelligence is about. I want to challenge you to put 10% of your resources over the next 3 months in HR professional development into social intelligence. You'll be on the cutting edge of the field, and your initiatives in HR management will improve greatly. You'll address a lot of the problems that we mentioned today: pessimism bias and optimism bias, halo and horns effect, various implicit biases, and so on. I want you to think about what story you're going to leave today with. Are you going to leave thinking that, hey, I heard this paradigm-shifting presentation, and I came back from this paradigm-shifting presentation, and I just let it slip through the cracks? That's one type of conversation. That's one type of story. Another type of story is, hey, I heard this paradigm-shifting presentation, and I went back to my workplace, and I integrated the strategies into my workplace. I spread these ideas to my coworkers, and I was able to really greatly improve HR leadership in my organization. It's your story. And I want you to think about what story you want to tell yourself tomorrow, in 3 months, and in a year. Thank you very much.